Welcome to Flyp Academy.
Welcome to Lesson 6 of Russia in early 1917. In this unit, the key questions are: who was Kornilov? What was the significance of the Kornilov revolt? These are the key terms. Read through them carefully. Kornilov revolt, martial law, Soviet, cadets. Task: pause the video and make your own keyword glossary. Add any key term definitions to the keyword glossary for each topic as you go along. Make sure you know what all the keywords mean. They are very important. Challenge: use the keywords in a sentence. Meet Vladimir Kornilov. Kornilov was an Imperial Russian general who was accused of attempting to overthrow the Russian government, the Provisional Government, in 1917. In today's lesson, you'll be gathering evidence and conducting an investigation into the accusations made and into what became known as the Kornilov affair. What impressions do you get of Kornilov as a person and as a military leader? What words would you use to describe him? What inferences can we make about his previous experiences or his leadership skills? As a historian, we often gather lots of information from various areas. You are free to conduct your own further research. However, you will need to pause the video several times in order to summarize the information being presented to you and record it onto your file. Your file will look like this. Kornilov did not believe in the February Revolution. He believed that Russia could fulfill its national duty of defeating Germany only when the socialist enemies from within had been destroyed. Kerensky appointed Kornilov as commander of the Southwestern Front, an area where enemy pressure and Russian ill-discipline was at its greatest. The next day, Kornilov ordered, without waiting for Kerensky's approval, his subordinate commanders to use machine guns and artillery on retreating Russian units without orders. When Kornilov was promoted to commander-in-chief, he immediately asked for total independence and responsibility. He wanted to be answerable only to the Russian people and his own conscience. He also asked that he be allowed to use capital punishment across Russia. Kerensky was not impressed, and Kornilov later backtracked, pledging responsibility to the government. Task: pause the video. What does this suggest about Kornilov's character? Complete the first section of your investigation looking at the role of Kornilov in Russia in 1917. The State Conference, 12th to the 14th of August, was an appeal for unity and support to the Kerensky regime. However, it showed how little authority the coalition government had among the mass following, and how mistrustful the army commanders were of its ability to maintain order. Kornilov's speech, in which he called for the death penalty to be extended to the whole country, was met with applause bordering on adulation. Kerensky had been apprehensive about Kornilov's speech, asking him to restrict his remarks to military operations and the situation at the front only. While Kornilov largely agreed, his reply to Kerensky, "I will give my speech in my own way," isolated Kerensky. Throughout August, the Bolsheviks had been growing in strength in the Soviets. On the first day of the State Conference, resurgent Bolshevik influence among the masses saw most employees not report for work, restaurants and coffee houses shut down, and cab drivers absent from Moscow. Even employees at the Bolshoi Theatre, where the conference met, were on strike. This event is referred to as the Moscow Conference. Task: pause the video. The events of the Moscow conference do not seem to show anything alarming. However, as a historian investigating a so-called affair, what do the events show about Kornilov? Record this onto your investigation sheet. The economy had begun to take a turn for the worse. There was fear of renewed disorder in the cities, and the fall of Riga left the German army a step closer to Petrograd itself. Riga was known as an impassable fortress protected by concrete reinforced entrenchments, but it was surrendered without much of a fight. After the disastrous outcome of the Kerensky offensive, the loss of Riga seemed to show that the Russian army was unable to defend the homeland. Meanwhile, conditions for ordinary soldiers had hardly improved, and in many cases worsened since the February Revolution. Finally, the infamous Order No. 1, issued by the Petrograd Soviet in March, encouraged mutiny and insubordination and resulted in a steady stream of dispirited officers resigning and going home. Against this backdrop, Russian conservatives mounted a final, desperate attempt to restore order and failed spectacularly. Task: pause the video. The fall of Riga was an important element to support from the Russian people towards the Russian war effort. As commander of the Southwestern Front, what judgments can we make about Kornilov and his military leadership? Record your findings in your investigation sheet once more. The plot under investigation. A coup d'état occurred with the aim of politically excluding those on the left. This meant not only halting the revolution, but reversing its course. Kornilov had hoped that Kerensky would cooperate in a tougher government of Soviet influence. This did not mean dictatorship, but a government which better represented the interests of landowners, bankers, industrialists and the military. Kornilov also had the support of the All-Russian Sobor, Council of the Orthodox Church. On the 22nd of August, the Octoberist Lvov met with Kerensky, saying that he had come on behalf of certain groups with significant strength. Lvov said that Russia's survival was dependent on the peaceful creation of a national cabinet to preserve law and order. On the 24th of August, Lvov met Kornilov at Stavka and gave the impression that he had been empowered by Kerensky to help form a new cabinet, with or without Kerensky. That evening, General Krymov received instructions from Kornilov to push his army towards Petrograd amid reports of a Bolshevik rising. On the 25th of August, Krymov placed the entire Petrograd military district under martial law. Kornilov ordered Kerensky and Savinkov, Deputy Minister of War, to travel to his military headquarters at Mogilev for the 27th of August. In a prearranged telegram from Kornilov to Savinkov, Kornilov stated, "The corps will be in place in the suburbs of Petrograd by the evening of August 28th. I request that Petrograd be proclaimed under martial law on August 29th. Kornilov's telegram was no better proof that he was convinced that he had Kerensky in his back pocket. He did not believe that his plans could go wrong. Lvov arrived back at the Winter Palace on the 26th of August to report to Kerensky. Previously, Savinkov had reassured Kerensky that Kornilov would support him in every way possible. When Lvov informed Kerensky of what Kornilov was doing, Kerensky thought he was joking and insisted on a direct conversation with Kornilov. Kornilov had assumed that Kerensky would submit without a struggle to the creation of a new government under Kornilov. But Kerensky concluded that he had been double-crossed and that the military was intent on supporting him. Task: pause the video. How do you think Kerensky is feeling at this moment? What interpretation of the event would Kerensky have? Task: step into the shoes of Kerensky. You're due to inform your cabinet of what has been taking place. Think about A. What you're going to say at this meeting, how you will explain the events. B. The consequences needed for Kornilov. What is best for Russia moving forward? Kerensky broke the news of Kornilov's treachery in a cabinet meeting, asking his ministers to grant him unlimited authority to deal with the emergency as he saw fit. They agreed to his demands. On the 27th of August, Kerensky asked Kornilov to resign and proceed at once to Petrograd. He tried to replace Kornilov as commander-in-chief with General Lukomsky. However, Lukomsky rejected the offer, defying Kerensky's authority by telling him that, in order to save Russia, you must go along with Kornilov. Meanwhile, Kornilov made an appeal to the Russian people, declaring that our great motherland was dying. He implied that the government, by allegedly accepting Bolshevik demands, was acting in the interests of the Germans. Task: pause the video and complete your investigation document. This becomes quite a complicated section of history, and so before we assess the consequences and the interpretations of this event, is there a simple way to summarise what's happened? Task: in the final thought bubble, based upon your knowledge of the course so far, what do you predict will be the future for Kornilov and of the provisional government going forward? Make sure you give your reasons to support your opinion. Krymov's forces had been held up by railroad workers, telegraph operators and local Soviets. When Krymov took his own life on the 31st of August, the revolt disintegrated and Kornilov and his associates were arrested. Kornilov had nothing to offer his troops. Kornilov continued to insist that he was not plotting against the government, but wanted to remove the Soviets' influence to save Russia, win the war and restore order. The military was implicated in the Kornilov affair, which made a Menshevik coalition with them possible. During the coup, Kerensky armed the Soviets since he feared that Kornilov's army would attack Petrograd. Ultimately, this weakened his position. Meanwhile, soldiers reverted to arresting and lynching officers, and some argued that Kornilov was a prime candidate for the restored death penalty. Task: pause the video. Do you agree with the consequences of the Kornilov affair for Kornilov, the military involved known as the cadets, the Soviets? As historians, when we look at events, people and historic moments, we often look to their significance. Significance is different from importance. A simple way of assessing significance is by referring to the 5 R's. Each R stands for an area we can use to assess the overall significance of something, as follows. Task: pause the video. Using the criteria, explain how significant the Kornilov affair was to the development of Russia in 1917. Make sure you give a minimum of 3 reasons to support your opinion. There is a common saying that history is written by the victors, and in many cases we can argue that it has been. The events of the Kornilov affair have been told throughout history through the eyes that had control of Russia and the information that needed to be passed to the people since 1917. However, everybody has a different view or interpretation of an event. Take a football match, for example. There will be many different opinions, views, interpretations of the same game. The players, the referees, the managers and the fans, both in the crowd and at home, will all see the match in their own interpretation. It's important for historians to look at all the interpretations. They are all of use to us. Nevertheless, it is important for a historian to remember that because everybody has their own interpretation of events, that these interpretations pose limitations. Task: pause the video. You're going to write your own interpretation of the events of the Kornilov affair. You can step into the shoes of Kornilov, Kerensky, Krymov, the cadets, military, Lukomsky. You will need to give your own opinion on the situation. Talk us through what happened in your opinion. If you are Kornilov, for example, were you really trying to do good for Russia? If you are the cadets, for example, were you simply following orders? Make sure you think about the whole event from the end of the Moscow conference up until the consequences. Make sure to also keep the account through the eyes of your interpretation. An exam question may ask you exactly how useful your interpretation is to a historian. I want you to imagine that your interpretation is about to be used by a historian investigating the Kornilov affair. Task: pause the video. Answer the practice exam question using your interpretation that you've just written as the focus for this task. How useful is your interpretation to a historian investigating the events of the Kornilov affair? Think about how it is useful, what does it include, who it was written by, when it was written, how this interpretation is limited, who it is written by, what does it not include, for example.